Then you can argue if it's pronounced Jason or Jason.
Yeah.
Which Douglas Crockford, the gentleman that coined that term, says Jason.
Jason. It's Jason, like a person.
Yeah.
Like the name. Yep.
I would say Jason, kind of going with the guy that created it and all.
Right. I would say JavaScript object notation because I'm a loser.
It is time to get
Ed,
our hands dirty.
I've got questions, Ed.
All right.
Okay, seriously, questions. I have questions.
I'm sure you do.
Okay, step one. I know you wanted to show us a chat app, but could you please, for the love of God, just show me a hello world? I would kill for a hello world right at this point.
A hello world.
You know what that references? Like whenever you're building a Vue or a React or an Angular or just a JavaScript or an HTML app, like you always start with hello world, and it's legitimately just a screen that says hello world. And like
we can do that.
Okay, because I got a little overwhelmed, and I want to make sure I understand the bits of basics first. Also,
so the Hello World app
can we define that?
The Hello World app for SignalR is a chat app, so it's kind of one and the same. But what we can do is we can start with the chat app, and then we'll kind of walk back to Hello World, and then kind of get some perspective there. I think we could do that. So let's start by saying a little bit about what we're going to do over the next couple days.
That's true, because people don't know. People in the chat were like, bye, everybody. And I don't think they know that we're building anything or doing anything after we have our guests on each day. So we probably should explain.
We're going to build some stuff. And I have a little story to go along with this. So pardon me for the old man story time, because that's how some of these things usually begin, is with my old man story time. Let me get my screen shared here. So we're living through the 2020 pandemic, which is stretching now into 2021, which is great. Sarcastically, I'm saying that. So we've spent a lot of time at home, right? We've got young kids at home. We try to do a lot of family game nights and stuff to keep everyone entertained and maintain some sanity, because we don't have friends and family coming in and out of the house. We're trying to be safe and not do a lot of going outside and interacting with other people. So we've got the whole social distance thing down. We've about exhausted every game you can imagine by now. And we started looking on the game consoles for just pretty much anything that we can play as a family. And we decided to buy Uno for one of the consoles. Really doesn't matter which one, applies to any of them. To only find out, and it's kind of obvious once you just think about it for a second, which we did not, because it's like $3.99 or something. We're like, oh yeah, we'll buy that, and like a bunch of other little indie games that we tried out that were really cool. To make a long story short, we pull up the card game on the console and realize it's internet play only, because obviously you have one screen on a console, therefore you have no private hand of cards. So if you're all on the living room TV, everybody can see your hand of cards. That wouldn't be possible.
Oh.
So yeah.
I was so confused. I was like, I don't understand the problem here.
So with a joystick in your hand, you have no screen to kind of have a private hand of cards. So there's no way to, everybody can see your hand. That doesn't work. So you have to play online. So it's an online only game. And we were very disappointed because, it sounds really silly, but when you're doing this on a daily basis, it really matters. But we have the deck of cards. We could have just easily got out and went to the kitchen table. But we're comfy on our couch, and we're doing this every night, so we want to be comfortable doing it. So
listen, I get it. I love me some Jackbox games, and my family will literally for just hours hang out in the living room playing Jackbox games. So I get it. It's different. Yeah.
So let's talk about Jackbox games, and those are I don't know anything about the architecture of those things, but I could swear on my life they are using SignalR for those things. They seem very SignalR like. So I thought about that. I was like, the Jackbox games, they allow you to kind of have your own private screen while y'all interact with a public, screen of some sort. So the concept is you have your mobile device, you get it out, and you join a game, and that game has some public information on it, and your device, your mobile phone, has some private information on it. And very easily you could convert that to many different types of games. And Crazy Eights is a...
Yeah, because there's like drawing games where you're all like doodling your own thing, or trivia games, or even joke games where you're writing your own private joke and it gets submitted and the TV will display one at a time.
It's like Mad Libs, kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are a lot of fun.
What's with the 35? Because I see you've got a wireframe here, or I guess a mock-up of the Crazy Eights Uno game, but I'm confused.
Yeah, so Crazy Eights is a really simple card game that you play with a deck of cards. So I figured we could have this public screen. Maybe it's in your living room, maybe it's on a server somewhere. You don't necessarily have to be in the same room to play this together. But everybody attaches to this screen with their device, and you get dealt your cards, and then when it's your turn, you can play your hand. So up on the main screen, you'd have kind of your draw and your discard pile. So we'd maybe want to display like how many cards are left in the draw pile, what was discarded last, or what was played last. In the case of Crazy Eights, that's your last played card. And then you'd have your private hand, and you'd be able to interact with that main screen by playing or drawing a card and so on. So I think conceptually we can do this pretty easy, but when we start getting to like game rules and player turns and all that is when it's going to start picking up in complexity a bit. But it sounded like a doable project that we could get done on stream in a few days. And I think SignalR with its real-time capabilities makes this possible. And hopefully we can get this done. What do you think?
Oh, I know we can, for sure.
So we'll bring this back up in a few minutes when we start, trying to figure out where to even start working on this concept. But first, I think we need kind of a demo, like introduction of SignalR itself. So we have kind of a base app to start from. And then before we get started, there is a landing page for what we're doing today. And I'll share that in all of our chat rooms here. Just so you can go and see what we've got planned for the week and what guests we're going to bring on throughout the week. We saw David come in today. We've got Brady Gaster and Kevin Griffin, who was in chat earlier today. Sam Basu as well. We're going to nail down exactly what Sam's going to talk about. I think he's going to show us some Xamarin because we're going to be talking about the web all week and using Blazor. And I thought it'd be cool to see another client for the SignalR technology, because there's a lot of them, as David pointed out.
Might get me to understand the word client a little bit more, because I think I'm very one-track mind. Like, like, is this the way it is? What do you mean? Okay.
So the server is the bits that you'd put in the cloud. So you want to run that somewhere like Azure or AWS. And that is the back-end system for connecting all of your various clients. So you would have your web browsers, your mobile phones, anything that is your user connecting to that backend somewhere.
But you also referred to like Xamarin as a client, but that's not a device. So
Xamarin is a mobile technology, so it targets iOS and Android. So those are technically client devices. Those are going to be your users on their mobile phones using a native mobile phone app. So you could write native iOS and native Android apps in C# that use a SignalR client to talk to a SignalR server.
Okay.
Cool.
Very cool.
All right. So let's get started. I ran a poll earlier in the chat room asking whether they'd like to see Visual Studio Code, or Rider this week.
What was the poll result?
The poll result was Visual Studio. So I thought there were a couple people that said Visual Studio Code. it might be interesting to start in Visual Studio Code and then move back over to Visual Studio once we start picking up some complexity.
Yeah, it would be cool to see the differences between them because I've only ever used code.
So getting started in Visual Studio is going to be a lot.
Ivana said that Twitter also.
Oh,
says
Twitter said VS Code. There's a lot less friction getting started in Visual Studio, just because there's built-in templates that you just kind of run and copy paste and you're ready to go. There's no command line involved. But with that said, I think we should take the harder route actually and jump into Visual Studio Code first and get the project up and running. And then if we want, we can switch over to Visual Studio proper after that.
Why do you call that the harder route?
There's just more moving pieces, more keystrokes to get started.
66% on Twitter would like you to use it. 21 votes. So there you go.
So our Twitch channel was skewing Visual Studio, and our Twitter channel, which I don't know if they're watching or not. So
it's just random people on Twitter.
I know, right? They're just like, I'm going to influence this show. I'm not watching.
While you get set up, I'm going to grab a little bit more espresso so that I have some brain juice, but I'll be right back.
There we go. That sounds like a good plan. So while Alyssa is away, I'm going to bring up the docs. And me and Alyssa looked at these the other day. So I will look at them with you all for a moment. And it's really easy to find if you just type in SignalR. It comes up pretty easy. I can also share that link I just clicked on in chat as well. But what's nice about this tutorial, and you can see a familiar face in here, by the way. There's Brady Gaster, which is joining us later, and another good friend of our Code It Live show here, Scott Addy, helped build these docs, by the way. Great team there at Microsoft that does these docs. But what they've enabled here is you can pick your platform. So if you're using Visual Studio Code or Visual Studio on Mac, you can just switch these tabs, and all of the tabs within this view will change with it. So we're going to start with Visual Studio Code. But while Alyssa's not here, I'll give a quick run through of what the Visual Studio process looks like. So in Visual Studio, instead of going to the command line, you just go right to Visual Studio itself and do File New Project. And then that builds out your application. We're going to be doing a Blazor client today, so we'll look at the Blazor getting started experience here. So we do create new project, and we'll get a Blazor application, and then we just go right through the UI in Visual Studio and add the client binaries through NuGet Package Manager. And then you edit a couple files and you're off and running with the chat application. It's really that simple. I gave a really detailed run through this one day. It took about an hour, but the code, if you want to do this yourself and you're not going through line by line, reading all of the documentation, you just want to get this going, it only takes about 5-10 minutes to get this started. So using Visual Studio, very quick and easy. Visual Studio Code, it's still not that bad. You're going to install some tooling and run it from the command line. And then it's the same coding mechanisms after that. So there's just a couple trips to the command line initially to get this started, which is not bad at all, especially if you're comfortable in the command line already. A lot of front-end devs, JavaScript developers, that type of thing, are in the command line all the time anyhow, so maybe you're already comfortable there. There's also Visual Studio for Mac. If you're on Mac, there's a Visual Studio executable there now. It used to be, I believe, Xamarin Studio, and that has transitioned over to be a Visual Studio instance now, and they're pretty much on parity with the features that you'll find on Windows Visual Studio. So there's instructions for that in the documentation too. And again, there's not too many differences in, or if there are any, in the actual coding portion of that. I don't believe there are any for Mac either. But this is going to be a pretty seamless process to get started. We get a nice chat app when we're done, and then we'll need to kind of build out the concept of how we're going to accomplish this application. Let's see. I don't want to get too far ahead of Alyssa. She's coming back here now anyhow. But we'll get into things like using groups. Groups, I think, will be a big help for us with the app that we're going to build. So we'll get to learn about how to work with groups in SignalR. We'll also talk a little bit about how we might want to handle keeping the game information, because we don't want to give too much information to the client, because any type of security, we're not going to do any security real best practices per se, but we don't want to have the client dictating the rules of the game. So we'll do a little bit of work with that, I think, as well over the next few days. And Alyssa is back. Welcome back. Hopefully you got your coffee, got your caffeine ready.
Yes.
Sounds good. So we're gonna start with Visual Studio Code. Okay. I have live share on that as well, so we can use some live share. So you and I can code together, Alyssa. So I'm gonna tab over to the Visual Studio Code part of the docs here. And let's go ahead and open, actually, let's not open Visual Studio yet. Let's go ahead and get the project scaffolded out so we don't end up jumping through a bunch of weird folders and stuff. I use a Windows shell called conemu, and this might look a little foreign to some. I don't like the built-in Windows shell very much. So this is the one that I use. It's a PowerShell program that I'm using here. So I'm going to go right into PowerShell, and let's go ahead and create a new folder.
Is that
so
like
I'm going to go to source.
Oh my ZSH kind of thing?
I'm sorry, what is that?
I said, is that like an oh my ZSH kind of thing?
I don't know what that is.
Okay, cool.
Basically, there's the Windows CMD command prompt, and there's not a lot of real great features going on in here. It's pretty bare bones. I think it just got copy and paste like 2 years ago. Seriously, it came not that long ago. So
wow, I like when people say bare bones, I'm like, what? Your font style's not pretty? No, you mean like.
So this is an open source project that is a shell on top of that, and it has all sorts of features like copy paste being some of the very basic ones, but there's a lot of advanced features as well. This is all of the settings. You can see there's like 15, 20 tabs just right here, and each one of these has a page full of settings inside of it. So we're not going to go into all that, just letting you know what's on screen here is not the normal Windows shell. This is an open source one that I like to use. So let's do let's do a new folder. So we'll call it Crazy 8, and we'll go ahead and jump into that folder. And then we need to use this .NET script here. Now, I already have the .NET executables installed, the installers, executable installers for .NET installed. So if I do a .NET --version, you can actually see those tools are already installed. So I have .NET 5.0.101 installed already. If you don't have those, you can go to...
Did you say that's the latest?
Yes, that is the latest, I believe. So if we go to... let's see, it's .NET. Is it get.net? Let's see if that works. There we go. Get.net.net. You can find it here. So if you need to install the installers, there's .NET Core, .NET 5.0. We want .NET 5.0, and you want the latest SDK. If you go to all downloads, you can see the different versions here. You grab the .NET 5 SDK and grab whatever installer fits your platform. That's what I have installed on my machine. So I have the Windows x64 install here.
I was talking to my husband last night because I'm on a Mac and he does some .NET-y things and he's on a Mac as well. And he was like, I was like, why can I not brew install the .NET? And he's like, no, you have to do the package install. And I was like, okay, cool. So if you're on the Mac side of life, this is true as well.
Yeah, so there's a executable installer for a Mac OS here. What's interesting is Windows has quite a few of them. So if you're on ARM64, you can do that. There's also Linux installations as well, which are very helpful if you're deploying this stuff to a Linux server.
You say ARM64? Is that like,
yes.
What is that?
That is the ARM processor architecture. So if you want to install the .NET SDK on, say, like a mobile device that's using a mobile processor, or maybe you have a Windows device, like a tablet device that's running the Windows ARM64 OS, the ARM compiled Windows system.
Okay,
you'd use it there. So that's one thing about .NET. It does run pretty much everywhere these days. Let's see. So we want to do .NET
you see what
New.
David said?
Oh, what did he say?
Of course he knows what the acronym is for ARM. Acorn Risk Machine.
Yeah, these are, so we could get into processor architecture all day. There's a lot of good stuff happening in that space. So the new Apple M1 processor that they just came out with, have you heard about that at all? The M1 Max? Those are ARM processors.
Is this on a computer?
The M1 Mac.
Is this a mobile device? What is this?
Mac M1s. They're Mac Minis, and this is an evolution of the iPad. What is it? The iPad Air processor. So Mac started making their own processor chips, or Apple has, for their Mac PCs. And the Mac Mini M1, like that thing is a beast of a machine, and it runs on a mobile processor. It's pretty insane, the stuff that you're able to do these days. But Windows machines can go on ARM as well, so they've got a build for that too. So let's see. I don't want to call this Blazor WASM. Let's backtrack that a little bit. Oh, no, sorry. That is not what it's being called. So we're calling to the command line .NET, which is kind of like if you're coming from the JavaScript world, this would be kind of like an NPM type of behavior here. So we're calling a .NET.
Are you generating a new project?
Yes, we're creating a new project.
New for Angular.
Yeah, ng-new. That's a better comparison there. So this is like running ng-new, but we're doing Blazor. So we're going to say .NET New Blazor WebAssembly application.
What's with the hosted and output flag?
So Blazor WebAssembly apps can be a client-only app. So you can think of that as like a JavaScript, HTML, and CSS application that you might host on a static web host somewhere, like say GitHub Pages, right? There's no server there. You're just throwing HTML and JavaScript up on a host, and people are just downloading static files. Mm-hmm. You can do that with Blazor. You can also host Blazor from a .NET server. So you can have the client and the server packaged up in the same project. So we can create a Blazor WebAssembly project with also a C# hosted or .NET hosted backend.
Most apps are going to need to be hosted unless you're saying they're like a static page kind of thing.
Yeah. So most apps these days, you're going to have some type of server or back-end architecture, whether it's like a serverless functions thing or there's some sort of user interaction that's happening. You're going to persist some sort of data in a database, that sort of thing. You can separate that client and server architecture out into different projects, or in this case, we can build them all into one. So we're going to just bundle it all up into one. So we're going to push this flag in to go ahead and give us a server component to this project as well. So we're kind of getting 2-in-1 here.
Have you ever like forgotten the flag and then added it manually in, and it was like so much fun?
Usually if I forgot it, I'll just throw it away and start over. It's not that hard to add, but it's a lot of extra work typing for the fact that it's quicker to just throw it away and start over. What usually ends up happening with these is the opposite way around. So you'll start with everything combined, and then you're like, okay, now we need to actually get serious about this project, and you start pulling the server into its own project so you can deploy that separately from the client. Realistically, that's probably how most development's going to be done, with the client and server being separate, but we're not doing anything that advanced today. So we'll just combine those together. The output is literally just putting it in that directory. So this is where we would, or that project name. So we're going to change the project name here to, what do we want to call it?
Crazy Eights.
Blazor 8s?
Oh, that's funny.
Do Blazor 8s. So we'll run this on the command line. Again, in Visual Studio, this would just be clicking the UI, File, New Project. You get the whole, and then there's a checkbox for this hosted bit. Actually, let's go ahead and just show it. Let's show it side by side. We won't go through all the motions of creating it, but we would click Create New Project and watch it sit on an empty screen for too long. I don't know why it did that. Then we would choose Blazor App, click Next, then click Create, and then we're going to get some more options.
Look at what David said. That was funny.
Yes. The whole R trend, that was a thing. So we want to choose .NET 5, and here's where we could do a complete server application with Blazor. We have a Blazor WebAssembly application and host it. This checkbox here is the same as that double dash hosted flag on the command line. And then we would hit create, and we'd be in the same place
It's ironic
that we are now.
As a JavaScript developer, I am more comfortable in the command line than with like creating a new app via the GUI. Like, it's just funny to me.
Yeah. So one thing they did in Visual Studio in the last release is they added the option for if there is a command line, if there's a template for the command line, they will also show up in Visual Studio by default. So used to be that you'd have to build templates specifically for the command line and then another template specifically for the Visual Studio tooling. And you're kind of like duplicating effort there. So now they're like, well, if it already exists in the command line, we'll just go ahead and let Visual Studio discover it and bring it into Visual Studio. So then you get like a GUI from just...
So what do you like just on the day-to-day do Visual Studio? Or do you
Yes.
use code?
Yeah, Visual Studio has a lot more tooling in it than you'd have to use, various command line tools, and then you kind of have an editor that's got a little bit less features to it. I just like to keep it all in one place, never have to leave Visual Studio for anything. It's running my unit tests and my end-to-end tests and the server and all of that stuff. But we will probably use some command line tricks here, regardless of which editor we're using, because there's some nice stuff in the command line that is easier to run from the command line than it is from within Visual Studio itself. And I'll explain that when we get to it. Right now, let's take a quick inventory here. We need to go to, it did create another directory. So we'll go to Blazor 8s. And then let's see what it created for us. We've got 3 folders in here. So we've got a client folder, a server folder, and a shared folder, and a solution file. So the client folder is our client application. It's our Blazor app. So it has all of our HTML, CSS, and components in it. The server folder has all of the server logic in it. It's going to be our SignalR hub or any other ASP.NET stuff that we want to do on the server. So if we're going to have like authentication or something like that, the server would handle that as well. That would all be in that server folder. Since it's all .NET in both the client and server, we can share logic between those two things. So if you were building like a Node application and you had JavaScript on the front end and on the back end, then you could share your JavaScript code between those two applications, no problem. Same thing in .NET. Since we have .NET full stack, we have it on the client and WebAssembly with Blazor, and on the server, then we can have a shared folder that has common libraries that we can share between these two things.
So since we're using Blazor, just to understand, is it possible to do just SignalR and JavaScript? Or do you have to have another thing?
You would still need a server to handle the hubs. So you can have a SignalR hub. That's going to be your .NET server project somewhere because you have to communicate with something. But you can have a client that's running in JavaScript. You can have a client that's running .NET code. It's even got a Java client. So the client side of it's very agnostic to whatever language you want to use, pretty much. Okay. To some extent. There was a C++ library as well. So, I mean, that's the major bases, I think.
There was. They're not anymore.
No, I mean, there is.
Okay.
I was saying it past tense to David's demo that he did earlier. He showed the C++ was one of the things that you could use. Would you use Azure SignalR hosted service to take place of the hubs? I'm not that familiar with how the SignalR hosted service works, but I believe you still need the same server application code. What the hosted service does, it doesn't replace your hubs. What it does is it forwards the traffic. So it acts as a backplane. So it's kind of like a load balancer and all of that in one. So if you have a ton of connected clients, then it routes all of those WebSocket connections through Azure. So you don't have to worry about that the web host running out of sockets and all of that. It's almost like magic. Like that's one of the coolest parts of SignalR is the ability to scale with this thing. You go into Azure, you click through a couple of wizard windows to set up your Azure SignalR hub. And then your application gets about 3 lines of configuration code. And just like that, all of your clients are routed through Azure for the WebSocket traffic. And you don't have to change any of your application code, so none of your hubs change. It just does it all through middleware, which is pretty amazing stuff. And then you just get a bill. That's all you have to worry about. But it's probably going to be a much lower cost bill than it is for you to try to engineer that backplane and load balancing and all of that stuff on your own. So it's quite worth it. So we've got our solution files. Solution files kind of like the metadata about all of these projects that we just created. So we've got 3 projects, 1 solution. We can open this up now. In Windows, you just type code followed by a period, and that'll bring up Visual Studio Code in the current folder. That may vary from platform to platform. I'm not 100% sure.
I had to make a shortcut for that for VS Code.
You have to make a shortcut
I had to
on
make a shortcut.
Mac.
So I think there's like a long way of saying it, but I wanted to just say VS Code, period. So.
Let's see. It is asking me to install some missing debugging information. We'll go ahead and say yes to that.
Wow, you just so readily installed it, Edward.
So the the tooling is doing some discovery here on the project and adding some additional tooling for us. So we go ahead and OK all of that. And it looks like we're ready to go. So we've got our folders here again, client, server, shared. And then let's see. We can,
Are you ready to say .NET Run?
Yes. So we can start from within Visual Studio.
Oh,
We
you're
can
gonna
start
press a
with
button.
debugging, run with debugging, all of that. Or we can just go to the command line. And we can say .NET Run. And I need to go over to, let's see here. Let's do .NET Build first.
Does it want you to go into your dist folder?
Yeah, then I need to go into the correct folder. Or I could run it, .NET Run, let's see. Can I just type, nope, I need / project. I can run it from the root directory like so.
Getting all fancy with it.
And now we have our app running on localhost with a certificate, or we can do HTTPS or just regular without a certificate here. And we will just open that up in the browser. And this is our basic Blazor application. So this is a Blazor app. The server is actually serving up the app itself, but it's all really just static code
The
here.
default app has a counter for real. Like that's there.
Oh, yeah.
It's just there.
It does.
Seriously?
Yep.
Like you didn't make this? This
No.
is just
It's all given to you for free.
Oh, how funny.
So we can just ship this, collect our money, and go to the next gig. It has this wonderful weather application built in as well. So in case we need a reference for how to display
That is
data in a
so
table.
funny. What's the
Get
home?
that.
What's on the home?
Home has nothing but this little survey link that takes you out to another page for a survey. And there's a tiny bit of like responsive-ish behavior here. So we've got like a sidebar that'll collapse for us into a little window here.
Good lordy. Where is all of this like let's say you're like, okay, I'm making a new project, and let's say you don't have a navigation and you don't want a navigation. How hard is it going to be to find all of those styles and the markups?
Oh, it's very easy to rip all of this out, or you can also start from an empty project template if you really
can?
just want to
Like in a
build
flag or something?
everything yourself. Yeah, if we go back to the command line here, let's do a new tab. This is something else you don't get with the default shell, is a tab interface. So we can just say .NET new, and it's going to list out all of the possible templates that we can work with. And there's more that you can install from the web. But you can do just an empty solution file and just build everything by hand if you want.
So it's not as easy as like -- empty.
Yeah, you can do class library as well. Like pretty much everything in .NET is either a console application or a class library. And then you can add what features you want from there. So those would be kind of like the empty projects. Like a console app, technically you could take a console app and just morph it into any .NET app. So that would be kind of like the bare bones.
Could you show
one
me
there.
in the app that we generated like where that nav lives and its CSS
Sure.
and all that stuff?
So in our client folder, this is where client is going to be all of our web application stuff. Underneath of shared, there are some things that are common to the application's UI. And then there are individual pages as well. So there's the counter, the fetch data in the index page, which were all of the routes that I saw in the navigation here. The navigation itself is shared across all of those pages. So you'd find it in navmenu.razor right here. So this is where all of the HTML and what little bit of code is in that navigation.
Okay.
So if I wanted to remove it completely, I could just delete it, or I could come in here and modify what I'd like to change about it. And we'll be doing that. I think what we'll probably end up doing here is we'll add a kind of like a server, or I don't know what terminology we want to put on it, but there'll be this common play area, the table that we're playing on.
Yeah.
And then there will be a page to log in with the clients and join the game.
Okay.
So we'll probably add some stuff to that nav bar. So we won't ditch it, but we'll try to modify it here in a little bit.
Well, so this is just a new Blazor application. We haven't actually implemented anything with SignalR, or
There
even
is.
included SignalR.
So technically, yes.
Wait, what? Yes to
So-
which part?
So this is not a SignalR app yet, but there are some SignalR pieces to it that we unknowingly added.
What do you mean?
So this is kind of a yes/no. It's a quantum question. It's Schrodinger's SignalR application. It's both not and a SignalR app at the same time. So the client side of the application has no SignalR code in it. We have to add a SignalR package to the client application to enable that. However, SignalR is built into ASP.NET, and our server project is an ASP.NET project. So SignalR is built into the server. We may need to put a
was
little
really
configuration
hoping
code in there to enable it.
Be a NuGet command, so this is disappointing.
So there is no additional libraries that need to be added to the server project to make it a SignalR server application. However, the client, we need to add some additional libraries to make it a SignalR client. So we're halfway there already. So we did get some of that functionality out of the box. We just need to enable it. And then on the client side, we need to add some NuGet packages. So we haven't got that far yet. We've got our Hello World application here. It comes with the counter. It comes with fetch data, which is something we should probably look at really quick as well. So where does the data for the weather forecast come from? So if we go over to our pages and look at our fetch data page, I'm going to scroll down past the HTML part of it and look at this code block. And you'll see that we're doing a method called await get from JSON async, and it's gathering up an array of weather forecasts. So where is it calling this HTTP method to get that weather data from? So if we look in our project under the server folder, there is a controller folder with a weather forecast controller. And you can see this weather forecast here is going to correspond to the name of the controller. So
Can
it's
you just
weather forecast.
command click on weather forecast and it'll open up the controller file, or is that not a thing?
It's not a thing, unfortunately, because when we look at the signature for this method,
Yeah.
this is calling get from JSON async, and it's passing in a string. So there's no way to tell what that string represents
Right.
on the controller side of things. This essentially could be any kind of string. It could be, api.github.com/something something. So there's no way to really do that. But
Yet.
yeah, I wish. I don't know how they'd come over the technical hurdle of that one. And then again, usually, like I said, once this would grow a little bit, they wouldn't be in the same project anyway. But it gives us a nice Hello World starting point. And this is a web API controller, not a SignalR hub, but a web API controller that creates some random weather data. So it is the weather forecast controller.
I thought it was like it's really not making a call anywhere.
It's making a call, but it's not really getting real-time weather data anywhere. It's just randomized stuff. So this inherits from controller base, which makes it an API controller. So it has the basic web API functionality like HTTP GET. So it has a GET, put, post, all of those. What are these called again? The verbs, the HTTP verbs that you can use on your controller on your server. So we can do full like CRUD, create, read, delete operations on data from there, all of that type of stuff. So if we go back to our app, and I were to go to weather forecast, is it with an S? It's not plural. Weather forecast / weather forecast. This is the output from that web API controller. So this is the raw JSON data that was generated by that.
Does it regenerate?
controller.
Like if you refresh the page, does it just?
Yes, absolutely. So it'd be different data every time.
Okay.
So you could see it kind of changing here. So this is getting served by the server side of the application. And then on that page on fetchData.razor, it's actually going to take that JSON data that the server gave it, and it's going to serialize that into a .NET object called weather forecasts, and it's going to create an array for us. And then we can walk through that array and generate a table and display that on the screen. So we've got our client and we've got our server, and
There's a table. That's cute. I haven't seen a table in years.
so interestingly enough, all that stuff that I just talked about, we will not use. So we don't actually need the weather forecast controller.
Install some NuGet. I'm gonna be angry.
And we're not doing any we're not doing like any RESTful like API stuff. So we're not going to use HTTP GET, post, and all of that.
Because we're SignalRing, right?
Yeah, because we're using SignalR, and SignalR is like an RPC type of a thing. So it's going to be using
your buzzwords.
WebSockets. So we're going to be doing remote procedure calls and transferring data over WebSockets through, I think it's binary by default with SignalR, or with Blazor. So you won't even see any data traffic that'll make sense going over the wire.
It's not, because didn't he say it was JSON by default, but not, this is different because of Blazor?
Blazor, I believe, is binary by default. I may be wrong, but I'm pretty sure.
Could you change it? Could you specify it to be a different protocol?
Yes. So I think you have control over that for, let's see. I know you can change that stuff, but you may lose some of the built-in functionality that you get if you start messing around with that. You may want to change over to like JSON to do some debugging or something like that, maybe, just so you have human readable text. But I can't think of any really good reason to want to use one versus
love JSON.
Binary. To me, seems like it'd be more efficient over the wire and a lot less prone to security problems.
Are you really worried about security issues with Crazy 8s?
No, we're not going to do much security stuff. I might mention a few things here and there. The main thing is the main rule of thumb security thing I always tell people is never trust the client. So we may do some validation logic on the server or something just to make sure that the data we're getting from our clients is valid and they're not like spoofing a hand or something like that. So somebody doesn't always have an ace up their sleeve or whatever it is. But as far as like accounts and authentication and stuff like that, I don't think we'll get to that.
I think for most, even like I'm thinking about like Jackbox games, and when you join in, it lets you join in with just a name or an identifier of some sort, but no like actual login is needed. So I think that makes sense.
We'll cross that bridge when we come to it.
How are you going to clean this app up so that you're ready to put some Crazy 8s into action is my question, because it seems a mess to me. A mess.
It seems like a mess.
There's
It's still, it's pretty,
There's bits everywhere, and I would have no idea. Like, if I was like needed to clean it up, I could obviously clean up the client side, but the rest, I'm like, I don't.
So we could do without the controllers folder in the controller
Really?
object.
We're not going to need that later for. Well, I guess is that only for things like HTTP calls?
Yes. So controllers are for RESTful endpoints. So any kind of API that's going to return just JSON information back, we would need that. Or if we're doing some kind of file uploads or something, we would need a controller for that. But for SignalR to do what we're going to do, we won't touch controllers, if any.
Okay.
So we could delete this. The only thing I want to maybe leave it around for is just a quick reference for getting, and this isn't the best randomizer, but it probably will be good enough for us to do what we need to do this week. But there is some basic randomization code that we could borrow later to maybe shuffle a deck of cards or something. So maybe we'll leave that there for now. It's not
I'm
really
like,
taking
what
up
on earth
anything.
do we need to randomize the cards? Okay.
Yeah, it's not doing anything crazy, but we need to leave that, or we can leave that there. It's not going to hurt anything. This has some basic error pages in it, so we'll just leave that alone. It's not going to hurt anything to remove them, but it might remove some error messages that may be helpful to us later, so we'll just leave it be. And then our program and our startup files we need. So these are files that control like dependency injection and basically bootstrap the application on the server. And we'll do some work in here very shortly because we need to get our Blazor, our SignalR bits. While they are part of ASP.NET, they need to be enabled. So they're not turned on right now because we can opt into what we want in the framework. So we'll leave that alone. And this is the main entry point. This is what I was talking about when I said pretty much any .NET app is a console application. So program is your main entry point for pretty much all .NET apps in .NET 5. So essentially, if you were to create a brand new console app, you would get a class, public class program, and then you would have a static void main. And this is what the executable runs, the very first thing it runs. So on the server, it's going to run create host builder, which is a set of APIs that are called to spin up the web server. So it would create those, it would run build, and then execute that pipeline of things that were configured. So dependency injection, the web server, all that good stuff gets spun up when run gets called, and it even kicks off the Blazor application for us because it is a .NET web host, so it can handle the initial request from the client and give us the Blazor app back. So it will actually serve the client application up at some point. So even though it's in a separate project, it is aware that it's serving a Blazor app. In the client side, we can do some cleanup here. There's still some cruft in here that we don't necessarily need a counter. I think pretty much anybody that's ever seen a Blazor app has probably seen this counter before. So we could delete that.
It's so funny that that's your like the go-to thing that's overused. I think for at least the front end to-do apps are the overused example.
We won't use the fetch data either, even though I'm going to leave the API in place just to poach some randomization code out of it. We'll go ahead and delete the fetch data. And then we remove those views, those pages out of here. So in our shared folder, we could go into our nav menu and just yank the fetch data and the counter out so we don't accidentally navigate to a page that doesn't exist. And then we need to go back to the application and see those are actually, let's see here. Yeah, it's still there, even though I deleted it because it's running the code that we built before I removed those. So I never ran another build on this.
You have to
So-
build every time. That seems exhausting.
Yeah. So what's unlike a JavaScript application, this is running compiled code. So we would have to rebuild and then rerun this whole cycle over again to see our changes. That can get a bit monotonous. So what we'll do here is we'll say .NET watch run. Did I do it back? Oh, I didn't put the project.
You are not in your server folder like a good lad.
Oh, I forgot the word. I forgot the word project. And
Is watch a flag or is it?
let's see. Let's make this easy on ourselves. And let's just jump over to that folder. Whoops. So I don't have to keep typing that in. I think it's watch run. I always get this backwards because it's reverse of what like the JavaScript side of things usually looks like.
What C# Fritz is saying, isn't that exactly what you tried? .NET watch run project server.
There's two sets of dashes in there. Dash dash nothing dash dash project server. That's weird looking. I mean, I don't doubt that it works, but it's very strange looking to me. Uh-oh. Oh, okay, that's the previous errors. So now it is running and watching the project.
Okay, so is it every time you save?
So every time I save, it would then
And how smart
reload
is
the
it?
application.
Does it reload the whole app? Does it just reload the tidbit that you changed?
Current point in time, it reloads the entire application.
Okay.
So it doesn't have, it's live reloading or hot reloading. I always get the
Hot
terminology
module
goofed up.
replacement.
Yeah, it's not hot module replacement. It is hot reloading.
Gotcha.
So it is reloading the entire app. It's not replacing just the bits that changed. So if I change an H1 tag, the whole thing reboots.
Okay.
It doesn't just change the H1 tag.
Okay. And it is on save, right? It's just as soon as you save the change.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and the builds are usually pretty fast, at least on this machine.
Oh, yeah?
We've got...
Show us one.
let's see. Let's try. See if we can window this side by side and get it to actually fire up a build on us. Let's see if I'll just... There we go. So I hit save. You can see it building, and it's done. So it takes about a second.
Cool. What is this using a CSS framework by default?
Yes, it has Bootstrap on by default.
Boo. Anyways, moving on.
Everybody wants to poo on Bootstrap, but we also don't have to write any CSS code to get started. It's there.
Act
We can just start moving.
Act like we don't want to, okay?
So
Everybody enjoys
we can install Bootstrap, or on Friday we can go, okay, we're ready to start our SignalR app now.
Oh.
All right, so we've got to add the SignalR client library. So we're going to install a package. I'm going to copy that right there. And then I want to go back to my app. I really don't want it running while I'm doing this, so we'll go ahead and shut that down. I'm going to go over to my client. And then we'll run this command from our client. It has the word client in it, so it's meant to be ran from the root. So it's adding, it's doing .NET add to the client project, the package, Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.SignalR.client.
Is this like where you would alternatively use NuGet or no?
This is using NuGet. So this is akin to npm install on the JavaScript world.
Hey, look! I'm not alone. I'm not alone. Okay, that is all.
Yeah, but that doesn't count. Chris doesn't like anything. He is an equal opportunity hater. He can hate on everything. I don't mind a good starting point. You can always pull Bootstrap out very easily. It's like one line of code to import a CSS file, and as long as you don't build too much stuff relying on it. So we can go ahead and add the NuGet package, and you will actually see in here it is going out to api.nuget, and there's a ton of stuff going across the wire here.
I really thought it was going to be like a NuGet install type command. I'm very disappointed.
So it's restoring packages, and it's looking at the system to figure out. They pre-cache NuGet packages for you, so they're very fast to install. So there's actually a folder on, doesn't matter what operating system you use. There is a folder with a bunch of cached NuGet packages that are commonly used. So unlike other platforms that I won't mention again, it doesn't take forever and a day to install.
.NET Add is the new NuGet install. That's what David said.
Yeah. They have in the docs the let's see. No, .NET Add. I guess they don't even have it in the docs anymore. If you go to NuGet, you can see the old NuGet commands if you want to look at those.
How long ago was that you would use that?
With .NET Core, those
okay.
Those new commands came with it.
Was that a painful transition?
I always used Visual Studio, and it was abstracted away anyway.
Oh, okay.
So nothing has changed from a Visual Studio user standpoint, because you go through a GUI and you just say, add the package I just searched for, and it doesn't. So if we look, it doesn't really matter which package we look at. You can see all of the NuGet commands. So it used to be install-package to do it through a NuGet package manager. And then you always ran into like these pathing issues with the old tooling. Like it was like, if your NuGet.exe isn't in the right path, it won't see it and nothing happens and it blows up in your face and makes you look silly. So the .NET tooling is global already, so you don't run into those problems anymore. So I like that. It's easier from the command line now. And we can thank the JavaScript world for that. So the CLI tooling got a lot better as people started to use JavaScript more heavily and expected the user experience or developer experience to be better from the command line.
David said, look at all those downloads. Was it a lot? So can you show me?
I think what it's doing here is it searches for the best place to resolve the packages from. So you'll see a couple different sources in here. I've got a Telerik NuGet source. So you're going to see a lot of just echoing of all that trash in here. So it's just looking for those packages.
Oh, he was referring to on the NuGet site. He said there was a number of downloads. Was it for? Oh,
the number of downloads. This is SignalR Core. This isn't the same one we installed. Let's look for the one we installed. That would be a better. So it's a Microsoft ASP.NET Core SignalR. Did I hit the right one? Okay, it is the right one. The download statistics, 62 million downloads of the current version, 28 million of total. That's quite a bit of downloads. Did I get that one right this time, David?
Kind of makes me think that I don't know. Like I thought the JavaScript community was big.
So there's another thing, if we want to put this in perspective of like node modules and all of that stuff. These are the other dependencies that belong to this NuGet or this SignalR NuGet package. So there's two other dependencies here. That means there's like 3 files that came down. If you npm install like pretty much anything these days, you get like 17 folders full of 11 billion files.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah.
But it is all that I know. So.
In defense of JavaScript, though, this is a binary format, so there's a lot of stuff that's just hidden away inside of these files. They're essentially zip files. So,
do you ever have to worry about like what you're downloading?
No, I've never had an issue with worrying about like malware or anything coming through any of the NuGet packages. I think it's just fairly well policed. You can kind of just any user can sign up and add things to NuGet, but I've never seen anything nefarious come across NuGet.
Okay.
Doesn't mean it's not possible. It's just I don't believe there's any history of that happening.